Welcome to Career in Ruins, where this is our final episode of Season 4.
Flown by, hasn't it?
It has flown by, but I don't know if I'm ready for the end.
I know. We seem to have crammed a lot of episodes in a very short period. So previously we might have a week off, or maybe even 2 weeks off.
Yeah, we were alarmingly regimented this time. I'm not so sure about it. I like the dribs and drabs approach.
Yeah. I think it's particularly impressive considering how busy we've been outside of podcast land. But I've loved this season. I'm not going to lie. There's been a pretty clear theme that's ran through the season.
What people we met in the tea room at Time Team.
Yes. But what regular listeners will be pleased to know is that we've moved away from that
yes.
rich theme of input and actually deliberately tracked down a researcher who we've bumped into in the past, and we're very excited. I'm really.
I mean, you say that, but this is almost a flashback to our first season where we were just approaching people we worked with.
Shut up, Derek.
Welcome to Career in Ruins, where we're turning back the clock to season 1. But thankfully we work with some incredible people, so that'll be really nice.
Well
really
recovered.
Nice. Yeah, well saved. So how have you been, buddy?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. I've just got back from a couple of days in the Forest of Dean. So there's a fantastic project that's literally just coming to an end there called Forester's Forest.
Okay.
And the Forest of Dean is just mega in terms of sort of natural history, cultural history, built heritage as well, and historic environment. You know how we talk about landscape as a resource, and it shapes people and people shaped it, and that is a really textbook example. Ignoring its royal hunting forest sort of links, I'm done with that sort of stuff. But,
You've been there, done that.
Yeah, but even with mining that's taking place there still today, and dating all the way back to the Roman periods, possibly even prehistory. That was a great couple of days away, looking at great outputs from an amazing landscape partnership scheme.
I must admit, I've got very fond memories of the Forest of Dean. It was where we went on an A-level geology field trip when I was a young lad.
Simmons, yeah.
And it was residential as well, so it was a little bit boozy for a bunch of 17-year-olds. It was a little bit boozy, but it was an incredible place. But you sent me a picture today, or I saw you tweeted a picture of a stained glass window somewhere.
Well, this is why I love the Forest of Dean, because it works on so many levels of awesomeness. But there's a arts trail and a sculpture trail that you can go on, and this morning I thought I'd get up early, have breakfast, and go for a walk before I have my meetings. And just down the road from where I was staying, there was the one of the installations for this sculpture trail, and it's called the Cathedral sculpture, and it's a giant, and by giant I'd probably say what was it? It was about 10 meters long and probably 7 meters wide stained glass window with depicting an image of the Forest of Dean. So there's a felled tree, there's some deer, there's some bracken, there's the hills. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
It struck me because when you see kind of a ruined cathedral or a ruined church, a tenpenny in post-Reformation Britain, but you're so used to seeing the stonework with no glass, so it was almost unsettling to see a window stood proudly alone with nothing else around it.
Floating. Yeah. It's pretty spectacular, and that sort of kicked off a day of looking at. Actually, fun fact.
Ooh.
We went to an ironworks. This is the site that predates Ironbridge Gorge. So you know how Ironbridge, you're like, we made the first industrialisation of iron. We're so important. Love us. Wrong. We're a World Heritage Site.
I genuinely hope they're listeners, but carry on.
Well, actually, I think you'll find what happened was a very bright chap down in the Forest of Dean worked out about adding tungsten to steel and improving its strength. And then someone came along and stole the idea because he didn't. He's a bit of a plonker and didn't put copyright on it. But and then our friends at Sheffield Steel and all that lot sort of pinched the idea and made their millions, and he ended up fairly
Oh,
poor off.
so the secret origin point of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, Forest of Dean. You heard it here
There
first.
you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that's my highlight. What about you? Yeah, what's caught your attention? How you been?
I've been good, yeah. I'm plodding away at work, doing the usual stuff. But there's some archaeology in the news this week, and it's that special kind of archaeology where it's
not about Stonehenge.
It's not about Stonehenge. No, the discovery of Shackleton's ship Endurance, which is quite exciting. So archaeologists teaming up with various other scientists have been out and about and identified its final resting spot. And I believe, rather than anything sort of being recovered, it's going to be kind of monitored and watched over a long period of time. But really interesting, and seeing the pictures, it's got a very haunting time capsule quality to it, it's quite exciting.
The pictures are beautiful. So that sunk 107 years ago.
Yeah.
1915. The story in its own right of it getting stuck, and then the crewmates and Shackleton's adventure of trying to stay alive at least, and some of them surviving and getting back to Argentina, coming back to pick up some of the people that didn't get away in the life raft. But amazing story, amazing bit of history.
There's something so tantalizing about maritime and underwater archaeology, and I must confess I spent at least 40 minutes today googling how to become a diver so I can go and see some underwater stuff.
Is that because you've got potential exciting projects on the books there?
Well, people I know have very exciting projects, and I'm hoping that maybe you and I can go along and film what they're getting up to. But watch this space.
We can learn to dive.
I think we should. But
yeah,
for our listeners' benefit, you and I spoke 10 minutes later and decided that actually maybe we should learn in Greece.
Yeah, logical, right?
yeah. A little bit warmer, a little bit nicer.
Off the Dorset coast or off one of the nice Greek beaches out that way.
Oh, that wouldn't be terrible, would it? Now, I suspect our listeners are probably sick of our voices by now because they had to endure a podcast with just the two of us last week, which I'm still recovering from myself. So should we bring our guest in?
Yes, very much so.
I am very, very pleased to say that today we're joined by Dr Arwa Kharobi, who I worked with at Bournemouth a few years ago, an incredible colleague. And we've been trying to get a podcast to work since the last season, and various things got in the way, and a pandemic and other such things. So it's really nice to round out this season 4 with Arwa. Thank you for joining us, Arwa.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, in terms of introductions, you are a bioanthropologist, and you're currently associated with both Bordeaux and Bournemouth, all the bees. You mentioned that you'd heard the podcast before, so we may as well jump straight in. And could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. As you said, I am a bioanthropologist, and I started in archaeology. So back to Syria and University of Damascus, where I started my studies in the university. I chose archaeology, and then someone from France, a researcher, came to Syria, and he did a workshop about Archaeothanatology. And I wasn't aware of the word. What was it? So it was so interesting, and I was so fascinated by this approach. So then I get the chance to come to France. And years later, I did my PhD with this researcher.
Oh, wow.
And this is how I became a bioanthropologist.
That's incredible. So could you mentioned Archaeothanatology, and
Yes.
obviously Lawrence and I know exactly what it means. But for the benefit of our listeners, could you give a brief outline of what Archaeothanatology is?
Yes, it is also what we call the archaeology of death, or funerary archaeology. It's this field which is interested in human bones, but with the taphonomy of the human bones in the graves itself, how the cadaver decomposed, the process that happened inside the grave until the moment that we opened the grave and started to excavate it. So what we see sometimes, it's not exactly what happened in the beginning or what was aimed in the beginning, in the moment of burying the dead. So the archaeothanatology is the field of following this process in details.
Wow.
Yes.
Fantastic. And you mentioned you started out in archaeology first. What was it that got you? What was your first experiences of archaeology?
Fieldwork, which is something that I really love. No, archaeology for us in Syria back to 2000, now I feel very old. It was a very new department in the country. We had a department of history, but we didn't have department of archaeology. So archaeology was very new. And I was really fascinated by the fact of really excavating and not only reading books in history. I love reading, but I wasn't really very strong in history itself, theoretical history. But this is why I jumped in the department of archaeology, and I wanted to do this.
So a much more practical approach to investigation as opposed to being desk bound and looking at
Exactly.
literature. And so that early period, as you jumped into that initial archaeology department in Damascus, what sort of fieldwork were you undertaking? What was? I imagine there were I can't imagine the sort of incredible things you were investigating, but perhaps you can give me an insight.
Yes, it was an incredible experience, to be honest, first because it was the first time I was discovering this area of Syria, north of Syria. I am from Damascus, the capital, and my sister has a friend who was also an archaeologist, and she used to work in a site in northern Syria with the borders with Turkey. And she told me, come, you can come with us and you can just try the archaeology. So we took a bus 8 hours and we arrived to Raqqa. And then from there, they picked us to the site in the middle of nowhere. That was the best part about it, I think. And I discovered what is an archaeological site. It's site of what we call it the tell. It's kind of a mount in Arabic. So you can see the sites from far. And then when you arrived, it's just like the huge archaeological sites. And it was a Neolithic village, burned village. So everything was really well preserved. The site called Sabi Abyad, excavated by Peter Ackermans, and they continued working until 2010, I think. And the site is just like an amazing settlement of Bronze Age also. And the Bronze Age became later my period of interest.
So was it this site that got you first interested in the Bronze Age?
To be honest, this site gets me interested in the field work and in general in the anthropology a little bit, because I excavated the human bones in this site sometimes, not all the time. But Bronze Age, my interest in Bronze Age came later. To be honest, I fell in love with this region, the Syrian Jazeera, north of Syria. And in this area, you have a lot of Bronze Age settlements. And this is how I found myself loving the Bronze Age settlements. And I excavated several ones. I joined several teams in this area later. And I just loved it.
This might be a really silly question, and apologies if it is, but is the Bronze Age in Syria comparable to the Bronze Age in Europe or in Britain, or is it earlier, or how does that time frame work?
The Bronze Age in Western Asia, what we used to call it Near East, is starting in the 3200 BC, and it is basically the discovery of writing. So that's why it's the Bronze Age. So it's a little bit older than what we know in Europe, but the cultural materials is a little bit similar. But what is interesting about the Bronze Age in this area is like you have this model of tells with upper city, lower city, fortified with double fortifications. You have in the upper city, you have the big buildings, the most important buildings like the Royal Palace, the religious buildings, and in the upper city you have the houses and sometimes the graves if they are not out of the city itself. So it's kind of organization, an amazing organization for this time of period. You're just like, every time it's just like so fascinating. Yeah.
It sounds like amazing complexity, and I guess amazing sites to dig. And I suspect, knowing a lot of our listeners are sort of UK and North American based, the scale of stratigraphy on tell sites must be quite different to what we'd be used to here. Whereas the odd Iron Age ditch or the a bit of a foundation for a Roman villa, and then you've got tell sites with sometimes meters of stratigraphy, don't you? So was this site similar? It had layer after layer after layer of activity.
Yes, it's basically this. You are right. You should always follow the stratigraphy. You have layers and layers. At the end of the season, when you start to draw your section, you're just like, oh my God.
I should have dug slower.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge site. Sometimes you can talk about 13, 40 hectares. So it depends. You have different scale sites. But of course, most of the time you are not excavating the whole area at the same time. But yeah, and to give you just an idea, a silly idea, sometimes we used to really to talkie-walkie to connect, to talk with other people, to call them for the breakfast because we couldn't really see them. So yeah.
So you mentioned these are big mounds that are visible in the landscape. So obviously we've got hundreds, if not thousands of years of occupation just built up and built up and built up and just appeared as a large visible huge earthwork in its own right. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yeah, they are. I know Derek, you pointed a few lumps and bumps out in Greece previously, but I don't think they certainly the ones you've pointed out to me aren't as big as.
They're not quite on the same scale in Greece. They're sometimes referred to as tell type sites.
But I think
their name is Magula sites, which means cheek, which is probably more of the scale. So it's a cheek-shaped mound.
Incredible. So your PhD, Arwa, what was that focusing on?
On these sites.
Yes. Okay.
Part of, to be honest. For my PhD, I wanted to do something about the Chalcolithic period, which is a transition period. I wanted to know what happened exactly just before this organization in the Bronze Age. But to be honest, it was just a problem of materials. We didn't have a lot of human bones from Chalcolithic. So I wanted to do Chalcolithic and beginning of a Bronze Age just to see what is happening. But we couldn't have enough materials to do a PhD from only Chalcolithic. So we did Chalcolithic and Bronze Age, even to the Middle Bronze Age. So my PhD was about 2 sites in northern Syria, one called Tal Hamukar, directed by Clemens from United States and Canada University. And the other side, the main site was Tal Mozan. Who knows me very well knows that Arwa means Mozan. And I promised last time that I will stop talking about Mozan, but I'm still working and finding things from Mozan. So I apologize once again. But no, Mozan is the main site of my research. It is a settlement from the Bronze Age, very well preserved, directed by Professor Puccellati from the Los Angeles University with Marilyn Kelly Puccellati, also his wife. So my PhD was about the Archaeothanatology funerary practices in these 2 sites to see what is happening in the transition period and to characterize these populations from a biological point of view.
Fantastic. I mean, that sounds incredible. And was that based in Bordeaux?
Yes, because I moved to Bordeaux when I wanted to do the Archaeothanatology, the biological anthropology. I moved to Bordeaux with the scholarship from Damascus, and then I stayed there. So I did my PhD with Henri Dudet, who is the founder of the Archaeothanatology. He's still working active in the field, and especially in Pompeii in Italy, in the cremation, which is not my field, but yes, it was in Bordeaux University.
So how is it, first time I met you, it was at Bournemouth a couple of years ago, where you were undertaking your postdoctoral research, is that right?
Exactly. I joined the team of Bournemouth. It was my first British academic experience because I moved to England for a postdoc with Holger in the project called Hyksos Enigma, funded by the ERC with the collaboration from Vienna University, Manfred Bietek.
And what sort of things were you looking at as part of that research?
I was looking at the paleopathological stuff. So basically, we had our main site called Tel Daba, which is Avaris, an ancient kingdom in Egypt. And we wanted to know who were the Hyksos. This is the famous question. We wanted to know where do they come from, and if they came from another region or if they were local, in which period they moved, if they moved. And my role was to do the paleopathological investigations. So I had to look at activity markers, injuries, indicators of stress, of oral health. This was my second postdoc, and this is where I worked more on paleopathology investigations.
So paleopathology is the study of how people die, is that correct?
Kind of. It's if we can tell, because sometimes this is the tricky thing about the paleopathology. So because you have a lot of disease that you can't really see on the bones. Sometimes we are studying a skeleton and we say that everything is perfect, but we can't really tell why did he or she died. But let's say aim of the paleopathology is to study the diseases, the ancient diseases, if there's the cause of the death, and if we have any other injuries, violence, for example, for some sites. It depends on the sites also.
An incredibly interesting thing to study, though. And can you give us any insights into the outcomes of the project? Any key discoveries or key interpretations?
We have many of these interpretation. The main one, let's keep it for the main side of Tel Dabba, which is in Egypt, where my colleague also, Chris Dantes from Bournemouth University, she did the isotopes studies. And we had a meeting just a few hours before this, talking about all the results, presenting the DNA isotope, the metric and non-metric dental traits. And what we found that in this region, there was a huge movement of people walking around, moving around. No borders at that time. People were really moving from area to another, and they were mixing each other. And that explains why we have sometimes types of funerary practices, for example, in this site, but not in the site next to it, which can sometimes come with this group who came from other sites only to this site. Know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's fantastic and incredible results. And you mentioned Chris Dantis, who obviously was on series 1, I think, of Career in Ruins. And I met you both when you were working in the team at Bournemouth. And whenever we interview someone or whenever we discuss anything on the podcast, I tend to scribble notes that are largely useless because my handwriting is terrible. But as you were talking, I just kind of scribbled down, yes. I miss Holger. And you mentioned Holger's name. And you're referring, of course, to Holger Szydkowski, who was one of my colleagues for a number of years at Bournemouth, who sadly passed away during the COVID pandemic. And it's so nice to imagine his legacy carrying on through the people he worked with, and it's so nice to think about him, to be honest.
Yeah, it's the second time that we are thinking about him today. We mentioned him in the webinar that we had a few hours ago. And yes, if I can just say something, it's Holger is the one who really taught me what is the holistic approach of anthropology. Why should we think about every small detail and put it all together? And he was also fascinated by the archaeology in Syria, because he excavated in Syria back years ago. And we were having our discussions about experience in the fieldwork, in the middle of nothing, under the sun, the crazy hours of working. So yes, cheers to Holger.
Yeah,
definitely.
and a very good pub quiz teammate, I should say as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we myself and Holger, along with Harry Manley and Nivian, would often be on a pub quiz team, and he it often surpassed people like Miles Russell and Paul Cheetham, so we were quite happy on that approach.
Cheers to Holger. But you've talked through some incredible aspects of your career, Arwa. But is there one element or one thing that you're particularly proud of?
Gosh. My journey, to be honest, it's something that I'm proud of. I will tell a story more than my feelings. I remember my first class in France when I arrived to do my master, and we were for 4 hours class. I finished the class, I went back home, and my partner asked me, "So how was it?" I was like, I think that it was something about datation and chronology, but I have no idea what was it about. So I remember sitting in the classes, really understanding nothing from the French language aspect. And it was the idea of the system. It was completely different from Syria. And I'm proud now to say that I wrote my PhD in French and but yeah, I started from almost zero, but a lot of people were there to help me, and I will never ever forget these people, because really without them I will never be here today. So this is something that I'm proud of. It's my journey from Syria to France, and I think that it will be something that will stay for a while.
I mean, it's just a very, very sensible thing to be proud of. I mean, speaking to two stereotypical Brits who can barely get by in one language, and you're writing a PhD in a second language and now talking to us in a third language, which is, I cannot wrap my head around it. So yeah, what a journey.
Yeah, certainly, that's incredible. And that's certainly something to be rightly proud of. I think my French ability is somewhat comparable to the Flight of the Conchords approach to French. I don't know if you've seen that, but basically GCSE French of being able to say "Où est la bibliothèque" and "birth" and soup de jour.
Let's get it. It's coming.
Voilà mon passeport.
Bravo.
This is very helpful.
So going on from Pride then, obviously you've had this very rich career of seeing and working and researching so many interesting sites and time periods. Is there anything in that time that you've come across that you've been envious of, whether that's a piece of research that you weren't involved with or a site that you didn't get to excavate, anything like that?
Preservation. I hate preservation. No, I mean, yes, I think this is something, I think because we were talking about some sites that they are amazing and very well, and how do you say that, very rich, but that you arrive, you see the bones, and the bones are just like, what can I do with this? It's just like small fragments, nothing can come from this. And you just like, you know that you are passing, how do you say, that you are missing a lot of information because of the preservation. So I think this is something that I don't really like in my field. But yeah, I had to admit also that I couldn't join some excavations programs, not because of my research profile, but it's because of the visa silly questions, and I hate that also because it's not so fun. But yeah,
of course, restrictions outside of your own control are going to be hugely frustrating.
Or sometimes it takes ages, and then you can't really get the visa at time to join the team, so then you just like, sorry, take someone else. So yeah.
Missed opportunities. Yeah, that's a good thing to be envious of, for sure. With all of this in mind, then we've slowly meandered our way towards the final question of the podcast, and that's That's the one around the time machines. Derek and I have booted up our time machine for the last time this season, and we've got our final return tickets ready here for you, Arwa. We'd love to know what you'd like to go and look at, what you'd like to see, and why that is.
In my career, you mean?
No. Anywhere in history, in time, in archaeological history. So any sites, any time period. We can move in location. We can take multiple stops. So for example, if it was one of your tell sites, we could stop through multiple time periods to see the rate of growth in those sites.
Oh, this is very difficult to choose. God. But this will sound very cliche, but I think that I would like to go to Egypt, back to the Middle Bronze Ages, and see how did they do what all they did. Take the time to appreciate all this knowledge that they had.
Because it is our last trip, and Derek and I can be pretty liberal with the time machine juice that powers our time machine. It's not electricity or gas, so it's fine.
I was going to say, I'm very unclear on the physics of how this is working.
It's fine. Basically, it's the current price hikes around the energy crisis aren't relevant to our time machine.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it runs on enthusiasm and overexcitement. Let's go and see lots of different sites. If you could pick out 3 sites in that Bronze Age period, what would be your hit list?
Oh, my hit list. Oh, come. I would do it differently then. I would take...
Okay.
This is a really very tricky question that I wasn't at all prepared for it.
Excellent.
That means, does it mean that I never really ended the podcast that you did before? Because I never really hear this question.
You may have just put your foot in it, Arwa. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You mean it wasn't gripping?
No.
To be fair, most people are fast asleep by this time.
No. I said it's my son was crying. That's why I had to go.
Good. Yeah, we can't argue with those things. But also, just on that point, Derek, you just made anyone listening to this episode's just been woken up by you as you get very close to them.
I know.
Sorry, everyone.
Hopefully, Guy can fix that.
No, I think I would go to Ebla in Syria, in middle of Syria. And I will go to Palmyra, also in Syria. And the last one, I think it's my British loving or spending much time in Bournemouth with the Stonehenge.
A fantastic hit list.
Yeah.
Well, they're all great. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time this evening and for joining us from another country with a lack of internet. And I think that it's worked out quite well, all things considered. So, and the time difference, I'm sure it must be quite late there. So we should probably let you think about preparing for the next day.
No, thank you very much for having me. It was really fun to chat with you. And yes, sorry about all the technical issues.
No, it's all good. It gave us an opportunity to test out a new system, which
that's
you never
good.
know, we may use again. Thank you, as Lauren says, thank you so much for joining us. And just very briefly before we let you go, obviously you're still relatively early in your career. So what's the next step for Arwa? What's next on the career in ruins list?
To continue, yes. Now, fingers crossed, I'm having an interview soon, so I hope that things will be fine. And I want to continue in the bioanthropology, but I'm slightly moving more to teaching wish. Yes, I would like to. It's time to share something with the young generation.
I mean, that's a fantastic move, and I, for one, would be envious of your future students. So best of luck with the interview, and
thank you very much.
Come back in 10 years' time and update us.
Yes. See you.
We'll put some more juice in the time machine and give you another ride.
Yeah.
Well, that's it then for a final season. Not a final season, but a final episode of this season.
Was that a Freudian slip there, Lawrence?
Watch this space.
Have we fallen out?
But thank you to everyone that's listened in and tuned in to this season of Career in Ruins. It's fair to say the numbers that we've seen are far greater than anything that we've seen in any other season. It's still somewhat taken aback by the enthusiasm, the interest, the instant sort of social media engagement we get with post episodes, people sending us links to videos that we've mentioned or sending us maximum Derek gifts. Please send us more of those. We love those. But a huge thanks to everyone who's listened, to all our participants. It's been a brilliant season, one of my favourites for sure. And also a huge thanks to everyone that supported us on Patreon to date. As we keep saying, certainly the large majority of these episodes have been funded through you guys, which is an absolute treat for us, because whilst we do love doing it, we also like spending the £30 to £50 per episode on feeding our families or going to the pub. Yeah. So whilst we do enjoy it and it is our pleasure, it's even more of a pleasure if it doesn't cost us any money. So thank you, everybody. And a final shout out and heads up for a week Friday. So we're recording this on Thursday, the 10th of March. The months are merging into one already, but next Friday, which is the Friday after this podcast comes out on the Sunday. So
yeah, that'll be this Friday.
Shall I just say the date? 18th, Friday the 18th of March. That would have been much quicker and easier, wouldn't it, Derek? First time team comes out.
Yep. Yeah,
and people can see our mugs on the telly box or a computer screen or however they consume their YouTube material.
Yep, it is free, and with any luck, we might just be on it, but we'll see.
Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think. And in the meantime, we're going to go and hide behind some pillows until some teams died down.
Yeah.
See what people think, and then we might see you for another season before the end of the year. Cheers, everyone.